I'm Ipsa, and I work at Goat Ventures, and I've been dealing with all these big buzzwords for the last few months. But before I go down to what I'm doing, I want to go back in time a little to 1996, where Garry Kasparov, the leading chess player, got beat by Deep Blue. That actually wasn't the end of chess, if we thought about it. That led to a new kind of chess, advanced or freestyle chess, where the players sat with a computer by their side, and the computer suggested moves to them, and the player could concentrate on the creative aspects of the game. 2 years ago, Google's AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol in the game of Go. Go, which is supposedly a lot more complex than chess, and Lee Sedol, who's the top player in that game. And this wasn't the end of Go either. In one of the games, Lee Sedol said, "This move made me think about Go in a new light." It was actually helping him rethink his own game strategy, evolving the game further. Now, if I ask all of you, what's the average of all these numbers? It's going to take you a while, isn't it? I don't see any hands. But if I ask you to spot the leopard printed dress here, how many of you can do that? Didn't take you a while. Now, there are things that the computer can do very well and quickly, and there are things that we can do very well. And it's not an either or. In any process that we are automating or trying to use AI in, there's both parts. And it's a crafted collaboration. And this is where design plays a really big part. So what did I do? For the last few months, I worked for McCarthy Finch, which uses AI in law firms, partly owned by a law firm as well. And like any other UX project, we started and asked the question, what should we solve? And we went and spoke to the lawyers and heard a lot of the processes that they were doing, but one common thread that we saw was they were reviewing a lot of documents. Their current process was, before you start anything, print out everything and distribute it among junior lawyers who will then sit and highlight things that are important. And we thought that's a good start. Then we went to our data science team and said, well, what actually can we solve? And they said, well, you know, when we look at documents, we can identify things and we'll do our math. And we'll tell you there's probably 45% probability that it's a giant, or 78% probability it's a lizard, or 93% probability it's a dinosaur. So it's a dinosaur. That didn't really seem good, and that was my first lesson, that there's always a chance that it won't be right. But the challenge was, what was the impact of getting it wrong? If you were just recommending songs on Spotify, it would be fine. But if you were doing healthcare diagnosis, it was big stakes. And so were all the projects that we were doing for the law firm. Then we went ahead and created a prototype, mocked up, and went back to the lawyers and showed it to them and said, what do you think? And they said, well, is this 100% accurate? Can I trust it? And I came back to the same point. Well, no, it's not 100% accurate. But trust is not machine learned. What is trust? Trust wasn't always being right. Trust sometimes comes in showing your vulnerability and saying where you're wrong. Or, I don't know, it's probably better than a wrong answer. And so we decided to not have a system which would just be an input and an output. But we broke it apart into smaller bits where people could interact and explore the smaller decisions that we were making to finally give a review of the entire document. Then we iterated and went back to them and showed it again and said, well, that's a lot of data, but what does this mean to me about my documents? And then we looked up to IDEO, which had done a really nice sleep app for athletes with a lot of data. But then they had to iterate to something like that, where instead of overloading the user with data, you give them actionable insight. So make data meaningful. And once we'd figured out what we could build and what we should build, we had to build it, so we had to train our models. Now, because we've got really text-heavy things to train our models on, the most common form of training text models was something like this, where you give the users an interface where they highlight things and tell the computer, well, what is this, what is this, what is that? And in the initial phases, it really makes sense. But when you're suggesting lawyers to take actions on that kind of learning and how they work, they really wanted the learning to be in context, because looking at something in isolation was neither engaging and nor accurate. So like Grammarly, a good example we saw was Grammarly, where they were asking you to give the feedback in context. And rather than learning explicitly, it was in the context of their use. So while you're looking at the document, you're training it as well. And then we went ahead and tested it. We gave 2 teams of lawyers the same set of documents. One set had the AI system with them, and one didn't, with the manual. And the team with the machine learning assistance did it 50% quicker. Now, technology has been helpful, and I think it's time we used it to make humans more human and not fear it. Thank you.